Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Typical Skeptic Podcast. I'm really excited about the show I have today. We kind of all put it together. I have with me the great Eve Lorgen, James Bartley, and Nate from the Voices of Orion. I kind of wanted to put this trio together to exchange thoughts on the alien interference in our lives. We might talk about dream infiltration today. I think we're going to talk about MUFON a little bit too. So it's going to be a great show. MILABs, definitely MILABs. So it's going to be an excellent show, and maybe targeted individuals too. We'll maybe touch on that. And just a little bit more about my guest. Eve Lorgen has spent several decades delving into the dark side of the extraterrestrial contact phenomenon, where other researchers won't go. She's the author of 2 groundbreaking books, The Alien Love Bite and Alien Interference in Human Relationships. And James Bartley is the host of the Cosmic Switchboard Show. James has investigated alien abductions, military abductions, alien technology, back engineering, secret space programs for 30 years. And last but not least is my good friend Nate from the Voices of Orion. Nate's been a member. He's been involved in the programs, heavily in the MILAB programs, and he has involvement with ET races, and he has a very good perspective on what's going on as well. So with all that, I want to welcome everybody to the show. Hey guys, thank you for coming on. How are you?
Thank you.
Very well, thank you.
Thanks for having us, Rob.
Yeah. So I guess I wanted to start off talking about dream infiltration, if that's good with you guys. James and Eve, you guys wanted to share a dream, but I'll just tell you what happened to me last night. I feel like I got attacked. I don't know if it was something demonic. I was telling Eve before the show, I felt like I was battling these demons. I even said this on my Discord group, like they could have been aliens. I don't know. And I woke up at 5 a.m, just like really heavily bothered. So it makes me think that these dream infiltrations are something more. And here's the funny thing about it was, before I went to sleep, felt like I was being touched, and I felt like something like information was going into my brain. If that makes any sense, I don't know if that sounds weird to you guys or what. But
Completely weird, Rob. There's something wrong with you.
I think it's the norm for us. Like, we've been dealing with this for a very long time, and we used to call it the reprisals. Sometimes it would come before and after a show or a support group meeting, or if an abduction is going to happen and you try to stop it. Sometimes weird things happen. But I had a bad night last night too. And I had to get up and pray and then listen to the David Case CD, which is something that actually I found out through James' interview with David Case, who did the anti-tinnitus, anti-V2K, voice to skull targeting technology, where you listen to a CD and it plays a certain, I don't understand the technology, but it plays those sounds in each ear in such a way that it somehow rebalances your brainwave frequency. Because when they do the V2K and the other kinds of targeting, they target and identify you through brainwave frequency. And then once they have it, they could lock in on it and then always use that to do like telepathic hacks and stuff, or other things through frequency. So it kind of scrambles it so that they're not as easily able to find you in the same way. And I don't know if you found success with this, James, because I know you interviewed David Case, and maybe you have more details on his history, and if you think this CD works with what you've run into.
David is an electronic engineer, and he specializes in frequencies. So he'd come up with he was putting forth a patent for a computer system that worked on electrons, if memory serves. So when he put the patent submission in, that's when he wound up on the radar of the bad guys, and they started beaming him and all this other stuff. And that went on for a while. Then he realized, well, I am an electrical engineer, so I might as well not take the sitting down. So he started playing around with a bunch of frequencies, and he found a certain frequency coupled with a particular type of a headset, which essentially decouples one from the computer algorithm targeting system, that looks for people's brainwave patterns, right? So, and, he's gotten a lot of results from it. So that was the reason why he created it was necessity was the mother of invention. They were beaming him and putting the voice to skull in, so he had to do something about it. And you know, fortunately, he came up with this method. So it was an example of awakening a sleeping tiger. If they just left him alone, maybe he wouldn't have done this. But you know, he did this. But yeah, there's a lot of that going on. So I feel for you, Robert, because I've been on the receiving end of astral dreamscape manipulation, dream hacks, and demonic infiltration myself. So I know what it's like.
I mean, because I'm not an experiencer myself, or at least Nate said I might be, but I don't have any memories of it. But one thing I do really believe is I believe I'm heavily targeted, you know, from gang stalking to like thoughts in my mind and like the whole nine, you know, like
Yeah.
I really truly dream or crazy dreams. Like, I don't know. I just feel like, so I've been doing a lot of research into the targeted individual thing lately to try to find out like what's going on with it and what, you know, like, and what they're using. And if it's the aliens or if it's AI or if it's the government or if it's all three. What do you guys think?
It's all
I
three.
think sometimes it's all
Yes.
three. Sometimes it's all
Yeah.
three.
Yeah. In
Uh,
fact,
wh- wh- wh-
yeah, I was just going to interject because I mentioned this to Rob and I only kind of found out this week, but I had heard about it through a Harold Kaltzvella interview some time ago, a few months ago, maybe. And then I heard it again on another August this year interview. But I guess there's a real technology that is probably patented by Raytheon, and it's used to create a frequency that gets into the mind of the person, and then it has an AI quantum computing learning module that you have sending and receiving of whatever's in our minds if we can be locked in brain frequency through thinking process. And it's basically if you're more mental than like heart intuitive, then it's easier to lock in on a send receive AI quantum learning. So what they do is they could read your mind with this frequency, this technology, and there's an acronym word for it, but I don't remember what it's called. But I guess long story short, there was some people who I guess maybe worked for the company, either knew somebody who did, and they had done research on this years ago. I don't know how long ago, but he said between 60 and 70% of the population is easily manipulated. It's basically a consciousness overlay frequency technology that uses AI quantum learning to predict and know the thought processes. So once they know and they lock in, then they could basically start inserting the thoughts that people who don't know the difference, and they're mostly on a mental binary, you know, he calls it the binary human, which is, well, he describes it anyway. So they're easily manipulated to think they're thinking their own thoughts, but they're functioning within the consciousness overlay control system. So these are the people that are sent around, the ones who are not predictable, who are functioning from an unpredictable, spontaneous, heart-centered spirit kind of people who are like sold, I guess. And then
sold.
they will, yeah, then they deliberately send, he said they deliberately send gang stalkers on those people to try to corral and manipulate them according to what they would want them to do, or to maybe just test and tweak them because they're not operating within the easily controlled 60 to 70% that they've got. So as part of this interview that Harold Kaltzvella did, he did mention the, you know, the jab and how that would pop the soul out so that people are operating more on a mental or a binary, like thoughts and sexual chakra binary consciousness frequency, which is easy to entrain and overlay for control systems. So for a zombie control, and then those 60 to 70% of the human population are used and corralled against those who are not. So the part of the argument was that he stated, it was like, wait a minute, there's, you know how, I don't know how many groups there are, like truthers. Oh, we got to wake people up. You know, the whole job is to wake people up about, you know, the shit that you already know, right? That's true. And then you want to take the ball and run with it and not try to waste your time waking up the 60 to 70% who already are on that path. So
There's no
basically
time for that.
yeah, so it's kind of like once you know that and you're like, okay, let's just work with the 30% that know, and then let's work from a different perspective of stopping fighting unnecessarily it's basically like trying to fight the narcissist bully who you know is going to be always predictable to do the same thing and never really be woken up or do the recovery work. So it's like we have to use a new strategy based on what we really know that they're doing. But what's interesting is this technology can explain a lot of what has been reported with some of the quote alien love bite behaviors of, let's say, someone suddenly doing the 180 switching off on someone, whereas they knew this person, they might have been in the family or in a relationship, and then after a particular event, and then Harold actually mentioned this on another interview where the example was there was a woman who came in to complain about like I guess her husband. No, she didn't complain. She was going to get a divorce from one of her husband who worked for Raytheon, or he had a friend who worked for them. So they were like in this good old boy club who had access to this secret technology that does the consciousness control thing. So they said, okay, no problem. We'll make sure that, she doesn't divorce you, basically. So within 24, 48 hours, they plug her into this technology with their secret access because they work for the company, this little good old boy club. And then she decides suddenly that she's in love with her husband again and doesn't want to get a divorce. So switching off, switching on, consciousness control. So this is already in the hands of even private or companies. But I still maintain the original question Rob had, is this alien, is this human, is this military? I believe the aliens probably had it first, and they're much more refined and smooth with it, whereas in the hands of military and the other companies, you're going to see a more overt effect, like a more sudden 180 that is just anomalous behavior. So we know this is happening now, and that I think there's more people that they're more easily affected by this because of the spirit jumping out of their body and turning them into a more entrainable person mentally.
Yeah, I'm going to add something here too. I had the V2K voice to skull harassment since the early 80s, not long after my abduction, since my childhood, around 7 or 8 years old, somewhere in there. And not just that, but I think that these technologies were actually handed to the U.S. military and various militaries under some type of a treaty after Eisenhower, right around that time, and then just kind of developed from there. I think it started probably late 40s, early 50s, and that's going back to some memories I have of a lifetime that was before this, when I was first abducted and then thrown into these things. So this has been going on for a long time. And if you look in society, if you look at our entertainment and everything else, it's trying to get us away from that heart-centered way of thinking and over to just an analytical kind of like more of an emotional response type of behavior, to where everybody has a short attention span. Everything has to have some sort of a reward to it, like an instant one, and everything is pretty much shallow. And they've conditioned us to fall into this, and that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing not just that, but a complete, I would say overall, a social destruction is taking place across the planet. Or everything is falling apart. Most people seem to lack a moral compass today to some degree or another, and society's falling apart itself. It's all part of a systematic, it's a program in every aspect.
So, James, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, to add to what Nathan said, it's a complete takedown of society. It's the moral compass has been reversed for so many people for a long time. Concepts like truth, what have you, have been made relative terms, right? So with this Bolshevik Luciferian mass subjugation of society in true narcissistic fashion, they've scaled it up. It's their insanity becomes your insanity, or society's insanity. The normalization of things that we would find abominable, reprehensible. They've been gradually, incrementally putting that stuff in our faces for a long time, and now they're doing it by leaps and bounds, because there is no safety net anymore. There's no impulse control. Like Nathan said, they're pushing these emotional hot buttons. People can't sit and have a reasoned debate anymore because they get so easily triggered. And a lot of that has to do with this en masse, population-wide, demonic, psychotronic manipulation. And everything is scaled up and it's scaled down. It's happening in the classrooms. It's happening internationally through satellite television, the same types of memes and themes. And what I wanted to ask you, Robert, is what have been the demonic themes that have been popping up in your dreams lately? What's been the nature of your attacks? Like, for example, you mentioned you felt like you were being touched. The onset sometimes of these nocturnal attacks is in the hours leading up to going to sleep. Sometimes one starts hearing bumps on the walls, like cracking sounds on the walls or popping noises, what have you. Seems to me sometimes they're tuning in at that stage. But in the demonic realm, they can just open up a portal or just jump right into your astral dreamscape and start doing things, plunge you into a hellish kind of nocturnal dimension. So what's it been like for you lately?
It's so hard to tell, like, if it's demonic or what, because I was in like pain lately because I was going through like some issues. So I had a lot of my healer friends trying to send me like energy, like, so like sometimes when I go to bed, it feels like someone's putting hands on me, like someone's like doing some Reiki or energy, but I don't know if that could be like the demons, the aliens, like trying to like tap into my body as well. Like last night when I went to sleep, and I woke up and it felt like information was being like funneled into my brain. Like I could sense energy going like directly into my brain, and it made me like it freaked me out to a point where it made me like get out of like I felt like something was touching me. And I was like, this doesn't seem right. I don't hear bumps on the wall, but something doesn't seem right about it. You know what I mean? So then I got up and I went outside and I smoked, and I was kind of just like kind of freaked out about it. And then I came back in, I went to bed, and that's when I had the dream. And in this dream, we were like just encountering like demonic elements, and they kept like torturing me, but then they like, like we're like fighting them off. I'm with like a group of people, it seems like, and then it seems like they're torturing me because they keep coming back. And it's like it seems so exhausting. Like when I woke up, I was exhausted. Like I woke up at 5 a.m. because I barely got any sleep. I was in the dream state for 3 hours. I would say I was in, or maybe 4, from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. And I woke up and I was just like exhausted, completely exhausted, and I kind of just kind of reflected on it, and I should have wrote what happened down, but I didn't. So that's all I can really remember, if that makes any sense. I don't know.
Yes, it does. And now there's two ways to look, or two or more ways to look at the information download that was occurring. Sometimes what happens is when we're getting a nighttime download from, lack of a better term, friendly or benevolent, graceful forces, the other side doesn't like that. So they mete out reprisals to you. Like I've known of cases where people were getting useful higher source information. Suddenly the telephone rings. Suddenly some other disruption occurs to break that connection. So it's possible something like that happened, or what you were getting, the download or the beaming, was just a precursor to what was to come. They were like locking in or something, but they do work in concert with each other. For example, if someone is an alien abductee and they're having, a series of experiences going back to childhood, and sometimes in some cases previous incarnations, what'll happen is, because these entities are definitely in cahoots with the government, for lack of a better term, like Nathan says, and because so many of these government operators and military aerospace operators are entity infested, hosted themselves, they're plugged into this hive consciousness thing, aided and abetted by all the instantaneous communication technology, the AI, everything else. So they will work in sync with one another, where I've seen it many times where someone's developing their metaphysical abilities, they're developing their powers, and they peak out at a certain point, and suddenly all hell is unleashed upon them. Suddenly helicopters are showing up instantaneously. And I would submit that those aren't typical black ops helicopters. When they can just show up like that, some of those are masquerading alien craft that can show up all of a sudden but look like helicopters, and that's well embedded in the UFO research that UFOs can do this. So suddenly the black helicopters show up, but because they link in high consciousness fashion at all levels, suddenly there's people parked outside of your house, there's people driving back and forth, there's people making confrontational issues with you on the street or in the store all of a sudden, because David Case pointed out, going back to the Raytheon type technology that Evie was talking about, their ability to link into so many people at one time, or conversely, tap into one individual in a room and either mind control them, beam them, or activate them in some way and make that one person confront you, right? Or confront somebody who's being targeted. And I've seen it happen. I was at a conference in, I can't remember where it was, high desert of Southern California. And Evie remembers Bill and Pam Hamilton. And there was this kind of weird ruffian couple that walked in. They looked like they just walked in from a bar doing heavy drinking or something. And they walked in and they immediately started harassing and messing with Pam, and reduced her to tears because they were so threatening to her. Then they just walked off after yelling some curse words and what have you. But that's an example I saw in real time of people just come in off the street into a conference and target one individual. So their ability, these aliens, and working through underneath them, these hybridized humans, these black ops, and also the shadow people, intrusive voice phenomena that goes on. They really do work in sync because the voices, intrusive thoughts start kicking in. And as Jerry Marzinski points out, they're always negative thoughts. They're always degrading. They're not uplifting. They're not positive, harmonious thoughts. They're all meant to drag us down in one way or another. So they like to keep us in the state of instability, of high anxiety, verging on despair and hopelessness. And I've been working with people in the recent past that have had gang stalking issues, and it really is across the board. Like an individual can go out and seek help, or join some martial arts studio or whatever the case may be, and it turns out that those institutions are likewise infiltrated. And they may not have been infiltrated to begin with, but because of their ability to plug into one vulnerable person in that organization or group, then they can start talking and working through the individual. And it really creates a Truman Show aspect. And you begin to think, am I the one going crazy with all these people acting up all over the place? And one final thought, I'll pass it on to Nathan or whoever wants to talk about it, is David also pointed out, and I've observed this myself, and Evie just observed that. She told me about a recent experience where if a targeted individual is being besieged by the color blue, they can work it out. So they can reroute all these people wearing blue garments, all these motorists driving blue cars, and just kind of route them to a place where the targeted individual happens to be standing. And it just seems like, well, everyone that's passing by is wearing a blue hat, a blue jacket, a blue shirt. Every car that's driving by is blue. And so when these people turn and explain this to a normie, or an abnormie, as I call them, right? It's like, oh, you're just crazy. You're just seeing things. No, that's well within their capabilities to do these things. So really, it's just to keep us in a state of high anxiety. And, to the degree we're getting interference, just shows the level of fear and apprehension they have towards us as individuals, our potential innate power. So, keep that in mind, Robert. You're a special person. That's why they're messing with you. But you will overcome.
You know what I wanted to say? I was after I did a show last night, and I was on until I would say 8:30 or 9, maybe East Coast time. So I had to walk over to my friend's apartment, which is 4 blocks away. I told Eve this before we started recording today too. And as I was walking over to my friend's house, this Jeep passed me really slow. And it was a black Jeep. It didn't look like Black Ops or anything, but I thought that they were trying to rob me at first. I had no clue. And I was a little bit worried because I had a little bit of cash on me. So that happened. And then that same Jeep, I'm not really kidding you, on the way from my apartment to my friend's apartment, it passed me 4 times. And every time they passed me, it passed me slow. The only thing I did was I just pretended like I was on my phone, because I figured like if they try to do something, then I can just make a, like make a call real quick or record it or whatever is going to happen. I wanted to kind of document it, but then they didn't do anything. But I just found that really strange, So I definitely feel like something is happening to me. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I definitely feel something's going on. I do.
I have a few things to add here. From what I've figured out from my experiences is that they pretty much hacked our reality and have created, there's a mosquito in here. So if I go like this, that's what it is. They've created kind of an augmented reality overlay. So what they've done is they've essentially created a trans-dimensional AI planetary consciousness simulation. They have allowed the US military and other militaries who have these agreements to have certain access to this, where they chaperone them and they run these horrible programs. And I have one piece of advice: if you want to get rid of the dream hacking, sleep apnea works perfect for that, because you'll never get into that state where you dream. It's kind of a joke, but I haven't had dreams for years. That's one of the ways that I was kind of able, to get out of that. But the other way is, even from a child, probably, I would say when I was roughly about 15 is when this started. I became more and more aware of, what was going on with me. I was more interested in these things. I started doing research at 14, and I started to notice that I could actually control my dreams. And that was a great way to stop that, because I would, completely wipe out the attacker, or I would just completely just switch the dream off and go to something nice. And there's a lot of things that you can do with that. So that was something I've always been able to do. So they've always had problems with me. Now, the psychic street theater stuff, I've had plenty of experiences like that, where I would leave the house to run some errands and I would sense that something was going to happen. I even knew what it was, because they were like setting me up for it. They were letting me know they were doing it. And then I would go to a food store and I'd sit out in the parking lot. I'm like, I can't go in here. Something's going to happen. So so one day I went to 3 different stores. And by the time I got to the third one, it was the same feeling. I just went in, and sure enough, I had problems with, several people that were completely abnormal. And I went through a period like that where so many, I don't know how many years it was probably 5 or 6, where I was constantly having these experiences. And then they kind of cycle you out of that. At least that's what they did with me. They put me into some other things that I had to go through. But I've been through all of this stuff. So I will say this: over the last couple of months, I have not had any attacks, which, knock on wood, because it could happen at any time. And all that says to me is that, the low level attacks may have stopped because something's changed within me. But at the same time, what's next? Am I going to get, the heavy entity attacks after this? So it's a progression. You can either stay in one place and be cycled through these events, or you can progress on your own and then get hit harder later. But they're going to keep coming after you, because they're relentless, and they're very malevolent. I mean, they try to destroy your life. I've actually had a situation where we had a mattress, and I had to cut it in half to get rid of it. It was like a memory foam mattress. My wife was holding it up, and I had this electric carving knife, and I could feel something was trying to get my hand to go into the blade. And then I stopped. I went into the kitchen, and I wound up injuring myself with a pair of salad tongs, because it made me put my finger into the rear of the tong and then release the spring. And then I saw this massive energy float around me, like heat coming off of a pavement. And I knew what it was going to do, because it went right into the living room where my wife was waiting for me, and I knew it was going to make her agitated. So when we got done, she sits down with this long face, and I'm like, "What's the matter?" It was a rhetorical question. And she goes, "I don't know. I just feel really grouchy all of a sudden." And that was the energy. And I referred to that because I didn't know what it was, and I was being lied to by ETs. It was supposedly a psychic storm. When negative energy builds up in the environment, it takes a life of its own, but really it has everything to do with them and their trans-dimensional AI. Yeah. And another thing too, when you activate or become more psychically open, as you start to awaken, it sets off the AI system. They've literally got a gulag around this planet, and they're looking for people like us, and they hunt people like us. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's pretty much what it is. And they are very, very afraid, because when I finally got to the point where they've tried everything with me and things came to a head, which was exactly a year ago yesterday, which is my anniversary of separating myself from this military program by destroying the silver cords. That's when the U.S. military started to speak to me through artificial, telepathy from White Sands. And they said flat out, because I asked him, I said, why did you do this to me? He said, to preserve the continuity of the government. I don't know what government he's referring to, but obviously it's the one that Klaus Schwab is trying to create, not the one that I grew up under with, the Constitution. So that's the ugly reality. We're at war with them. Yeah. It's a Cold War right now, but eventually it's going to go hot. And that's what they're worried about, because you have the split soul phenomenon where your higher self can exit and actually, carry out a mission. And they're scared to death of that, because we're like sleeper cells to them. That's what they told me. And that's why they said that they went after me for 2 consecutive lifetimes. Starting in the first lifetime, I was abducted at 7 and then 6 in this one. And it's been hell ever since. But I can say one thing: after I separated from them, they did everything they could, to get me, but I'm still here and I'm doing a lot better now. So thank God for that. And thank God for you two, for the fact that you're out there telling the truth and you're not afraid to speak up, and you're not afraid to, to put this information out there. I'm one of the only people, probably the only person I know that actually has a documented situation with Rex from the Leak Project. I emailed him and they put an implanted like a dreamscape into him to completely frighten him away from me, and I've got it documented. You would think that would get me someplace, but some recognition, but it seems like it just scares more people away, and that's part of the problem here.
Yeah.
Because when you find out that they can reach out and hurt you, and it's not just regular harassment or a threatening phone call, they can hack in your mind. That really scares people.
Yeah.
So there's my 2 cents.
It's not, wait, before you go, Eve, I'll just say it's not just that they can hack in your mind, they can hack into your body too. And like me, like I don't know how to protect myself. So I've been going through like massive pains lately, like from my liver to then the back of my ribs with cysts on it. Like they just find ways to attack you. Like it's insane. But then, I'll just say that I've had people, I think, that really healed me. I really believe in healing abilities. I really, truly believe that someone was able to, Selena, her name is actually, she's in my Discord group. She was able to do miracles, because I don't know how to protect myself. I really don't. I mean, I shouldn't probably say that in public, but I don't know how to, if it's something physical, I know, I can handle myself there. But like when it comes to the spiritual stuff, I'm like a first grader or something.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay to admit that, because that means you're humble. That is the key. If you don't have that ego, somebody that's in real big trouble would be in your situation and tell everyone, "Oh, I've got it taken care of." I haven't had an attack in about 2.5 months, but that still doesn't mean that it stopped. I could have one in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So, but you have the right attitude for this, Rob.
I agree, Nathan. It's that really humility and actually admitting when we're having a bad night, a bad day. We don't always have perfect control over this. And I found that the people who think they do are really just blowing smoke, or they've got an entity protecting them, but they're part of the hierarchy of entities that have made agreements. That's what I think.
Or they've hijacked your higher self and they're feeding that into you. Because I've had that too.
It's I'm trying to remember what I was going to say now, but because I've had some things relatively recently. It kind of goes into, it's not just a dream hack. It was being shown like, how sometimes these beings, they'll taunt you with it's like a taunting saying, well, we have control. They'll show you a dream, or they'll enter your dreamscape to show you how they have control over a particular person or a group that and then you find out, but the group doesn't know, or the person doesn't know, or they're just messing with you. But then I was shown something about, and this was a conversation I had with another friend who actually saw something similar, but it was a spiritual group, a church, where I was shown by the head entity that was running the entire church, who had co-opted it. And it was in one of these dreamscapes that it was like, I knew it was like a false theater because it felt fake. It wasn't like real. And then the being showed itself to me. It was acting actually proud and I don't know how to say it. There's a certain feel of these beings. And I think it was a high level Anunnaki or a white, what they call the albino reptilian royal type. And it was dressed as a human, a very, very like 7 foot tall Caucasian, kind of like royal English royalty kind of look, all dressed in white. And it was showing me that it was like the head of this particular church. It like ran the church. It co-opted the entire church, and it was really proud of it. Like it was getting in all the worship energy. And so this being came up to me and it had no shoes on, but wearing all white. And then put its foot up on like this bench thing that I was standing close to, so that he could make sure that I saw his foot, and then part of his ankle and above his ankle, the skin. He says, please, feel how soft my skin is. And it was like very white and pale. And I noticed his toenails and I touched his skin. It was almost like a thing they do. Like if they allow you to touch their skin on their lower leg or their feet, it's like an act of, bequeathing the honor to trust you to touch their feet. It was a really weird thing. But then when I looked at his toes, he had 10 toes on each foot. And each of the toes were like very well manicured and buffed, like a royal would get a pedicure. And it was basically gloating that it owned this entire church and that it was running, the people in the entire church. And it just kind of floored me that it wanted to show me that. I prayed about it though beforehand to want to know the truth and to be continually tuned in to what my spirit is going to tell me about this particular church and a group of people. And then it showed me, but it kind of floored me the way it did that, with the whole foot thing and with the toes, So that was another thing that was shown, and how it was basically gloating over its control over this organization. But the other thing that the friend,
harvest, right? I'm sorry, I was just going to ask you. They're loosh harvesting, right?
yes, and the thing is, it didn't have a malevolent, evil, want to get you kind of feel. It was more like it was gloating over that they own this church and it's theirs. And, we'll honor you. You join the church. You're ours. And, we'll give you favors. You can touch my feet. And it was like a act of honor, but they didn't have an evil, typical reptilian feel. But this conversation I guess had come up because another friend of mine had mentioned on a video and even privately that they went to a funeral, and it was a funeral of a friend where they went to a church where the service was held. But psychically, when she went into the church, she saw this big interdimensional, I guess she saw it in her third eye, and like sensed like this entity egregore thing that was like this big tube worm-like structure thing that, as if it was there to like suck in all the worship energy, the grief energy, or just, it was like the egregore of the church that funneled the energy to it, like another dimensional realm or another entity that was feeding off of that. So I believe that this kind of thing goes on, and that there's groups of people who can be kind of corralled and controlled under certain entities. And that's what happens when and this goes into some of the Harold Kaltzavela insights in a different way of perceiving things, like from a shamanic. If you can go into the astral and you perceive with your clairvoyant faculties what's going on in all these different layers of the astral and the interdimensional, hyperdimensional beings that work in layers in and around and through people and groups of people, like hierarchies, then you can see, who's pulling the strings of who. And I remember years ago, and this was somebody James and I knew, and I think you had him on a show one time, James, and I did an article write-up, and it was I don't know if the guy was German, but he had a female partner who did these healing sessions with people. And then one of the main types of entities that they kept running into, they called them the octopus feeders. So that they were like these gargantuous octopus astral egregoric beings that would, have like the big head with like multiple tails, and then they would affect like thousands of people. And then, many different people would be hooked into something, but it would be hooked into the egregore of the octopus being. And so this same type of being was described by Harold Kaltzavela, that there was he says that there's three major entity attachments that control humans more or less. Like that's how we're so entrapped here with all these dramas and manipulations with narcissists, and seemingly like you feel like you've done all your work, but then you keep running into these things like they're arranged, like interdimensionally. So he was saying that, I think it was something like, I don't know, there's a spider being, and there's a kraken, which is the octopus being, and then there's the kundalini serpent being, which is associated with the kundalini, which I found very interesting because a lot of people aren't willing to admit that the whole kundalini snake thing is actually an attachment that can control and give people power, but it's also part of I guess, an artificial attachment thing that could affect people on a spiritual level. And then these three major types of entities, then they can control and manipulate groups of people, and why and how you interact with others or be attracted to others, like in terms of romantic partners and stuff. So there's so much more going on all these different levels, you know?
Hey, what's
This-
out of
please
these?
continue.
I'm sorry, James. I
Please.
just wanted to ask Eve, and I wanted to ask you as well. Do you think these entities are actually AI, or do you think that they're actually real, or is it a combination of the two? Because that's the area that I'm not quite astute in. I think it's AI predominantly, but I could be wrong. It seems like there's in the the animal kingdom and like in nature there are parasites, so maybe there'd be ones on the astral. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I remember years ago, I don't remember his name. It was a guy who was doing implant removals. And he would talk about one that was frequently found. It was like a black box near people's heads, and it was called the chatterbox. But it's almost like it's an artificial construct that keeps, they're like inserted in your field, and then you get this telepathic chatter shit going on,
Yeah,
and
I've had
different
that.
kinds of like implant shapes that seem artificial, like, boxes and squares, which seem more, artificial than natural, that would show up in different ways. So I really think there is like a quantum learning kind of thing going on. Like maybe this is associated with the beast in the Revelation thing, where the beast, all this quantum learning thing, it gets more and more powerful to execute its power. And I think it functions on like the mental chakra and a lot of times the sexual energy. So I think if attachments can happen there, and then people function through these chakras because their heart is not like really connected with their spirit because they're shut down, or they're like, they're not in their bodies, then they're going to be more easily manipulated by these forces, you know?
Well, that's what I
I
tell
think.
people in order. I'm sorry. Why don't you go ahead,
Oh
James?
no. I just want to say real quick that I think that it could be both, because the what some people with the etheric third eye vision, the psychic vision, can see is these almost mechanical, robotic looking spider thingies that seem to work through digital devices. I mean, they can pop out on people's computer monitors, etc. But there seems to be an analog between the AI and some of the things that are out there in this or other dimensions. Like, for example, I've never done ayahuasca, but people tell me that when they've taken it and they go on the ayahuasca trip, they see a bewildering variety of entities. And one of the most commonly reported ones are snakes. And
Oh,
Evie
yeah.
just mentioned that with these snake entities, there really are cases of a snake or a worm-like entity, and that's what the women who have had this describe it as such, being implanted into their vaginas, where
Oh,
they
yeah.
could, and
Mhm.
when Robert was talking about being touched and poked and prodded, almost like he was being worked on, that's a very real aspect of this, where in an interdimensional sense, we can be medically, surgically operated on, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
where something elsewhere is being done to our energy bodies, but it's having a direct impact on our physical bodies. And one of these things is the implantation of these snake worm things in women's vaginas, but it's also the snake entities that embed themselves not only the humans, but the reptilians, Dracos, and other beings. And they grow based on how much worship energy or loosh
Oh,
or
wow.
anxiety energy they're receiving. So I think they work in concert. I think they do. The AI works with um, these interdimensional entities, and I think that the whole demiurge is it's not only this natural or supernatural force that's growing and spreading its tendrils in every direction, but there's an AI component to it too. AI is not new. It's not hasn't been discovered on our planet. It's been out there all along, all this time. It just finally made its way to our little corner of the multiverse. So anyhow, yeah,
Yeah.
please
I
continue.
just wanted to say real quick, it makes me think of like the cases when they talk about like Enki and Thoth and the serpent knowledge. It makes me think that they put that out there for like a psyop almost, because then when you look in the Gnostic text, like you said, the demiurge, but the archons are actually supposedly serpents too, which is
Yes.
really interesting.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
thing I wanted to add is I was involved for 7 months in this group called the Joy of Satan, which is a virtual temple complex. Yeah, it's the name, the oxymoron of a name that actually caught my attention when I was looking, because I was searching for 2 years. I had a pretty powerful 3 weeks of psychic experiences after I had a really horrible allergic reaction to Singular, the allergy drug, and then I started having these psychic events, and I was told to go look for people like myself. So I looked for 2 years. That's how I found this Joy of Satan, and I was programmed to go in there. As it turns out, from what I understand, it was a cult being run under something called Project Ibis, which is essentially an engineered false awakening, or a false white light, or a false occult awakening for the star seeds, apparently. And this was an offensive maneuver to shut down or derail the awakening, to reduce the risk that we all pose to them. So they're creating these virtual temple complexes. And one of the things that we did frequently in this was we removed these attachments, and some of them did look like worms. There was all sorts of different weird devices, spiky things they'd stick in your third eye, things that look like a grub, a worm, a parasite of some kind. And one of the things that they always do in these new age cults, or any of it actually, is they will put people together in a group through a process that I call subconscious psychic networking. And that's where they bring people together. And that's where these love bite things come from too. And they'll give somebody the ability to heal the rest of the group, and then have that person, that's the healer, and then everybody else gets abused. And then sometimes the healer will have somebody that actually helps them. But they make these little groups, and then they just knock the hell out of you with this stuff. And that's one of the things that I noticed. And I've noticed that something that you see with these starseed influencers that are out there today, creating these virtual temple complexes. It's the same exact pattern. They'll have a healer friend that'll help remove the attachments, even though the person is actually being manipulated to work for the program to recruit others in order to set these scenarios up. They themselves still have some low-level attacks. They generally don't get injured. They're more of a nuisance, but they also create a support system around, the guru, to make them, because they have to be attacked as well, because otherwise it just wouldn't feel right. It wouldn't be the right experience to motivate that person. A lot of times they'll use, like if they do a video, for example, and they talk about a certain subject, they'll set up a reptilian attack or some other type of psychic attack, not as a reward, but as a way of reinforcing their behavior so that they think they've done something good. When in fact, what they've done is pushed alien propaganda to a large number of people, which is facilitated by big tech, because they shadow ban people like us who talk about these issues that are out there to warn people. And then they prop up those who are, completely innocent in the way they're thinking most of the time, but they're out there recruiting people in order to set more of this up. And that's how they take more of us down and compromise us. And it completely corrupts you. Plus you have the false AI source experience, where people think they're talking with God, but in fact, it over time, you can always see the end result. They become more corrupted. So, and that's a big problem today. It's very, very risky, because I'm sure right now as we speak, somebody's teenager is looking at the Joy of Satan website or some other website, and it looks good, and they're being motivated at a subconscious level, to sign up and join and become another victim. And for those people who are outliers and not a MILAB, you can become a MILAB and become hijacked by getting involved in these groups. Because once you open yourself up to this, and if you're the right person that they're looking for, because they want people that have psychic abilities, whether they're active or not, they're looking for them. As soon as you activate, The AI system wants to herd you into these virtual temple complexes. And this is something I've been talking about, but it hasn't been gaining much, traction because people simply don't want to hear about it. They want to hear about, the good love and light. What's the good news? What's the Galactic Federation update? When in fact, it's like the Pied Piper leading everybody to slaughter. So,
Yeah, I would agree. Because I had an experience with a group, but I don't want to say what group it was, but it was a type of group that, let's say somebody who's recovering from their weird experiences, whether it's MILAB abductions or just exploring it and wanting to get involved in another group to maybe do remote viewing or learn telepathic contact or get more involved with connecting with Gaia or something. And then it could be a group led by a charismatic person who has abilities, and then it's an entrapment scheme to get them in a culty thing. And then things start happening to that group that's deliberately done with technology and sorcery and black magic to basically handle and destroy the person if they can't use them as an operative for their own agenda. So I've experienced that too, where it was pretty difficult to extract myself from, and it was very life-threatening and very scary. And most of the people who were involved in it, they had no idea, and I couldn't talk to them, but people had come to me later and reported on the same person that they had a very negative experience with them. But most people, I mean, based on what I experienced, it could really kill you, or it could really turn you, or just, I think I could understand why people just are really quiet and just don't go further with any whistleblowing after a certain point. But yeah, and it is technology.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to martyr yourself. I mean, I did a psychic reading with a friend on someone that I met in the Farsight forum, from the Farsight Institute. And she lived in Oregon. And we did a simple psychic reading. I did a little bit of information I got from my so-called ETs, which are AI, and my friend was doing the same thing. But I was horrified afterward to find out that they had horrible events take place in their lives for months. They nearly lost their house. The husband lost his job, and it got so bad that he asked his wife, he goes, "Do you think it had anything to do with those psychics that you talked to?" And that's something that's a big problem because they'll hijack someone and then use that person to get to, to other people. Simon Parks is a good example of this. And then, I'm not here to trash Simon. He's a victim of this, but it's well documented. He started a group, basically a virtual temple complex. He was working with people doing psychic work, readings and stuff. And the women were reporting that an entity that looked like Simon, along with other reptilians, were coming into a dream or into their room at night and actually astrally raping them. And then Simon had to answer for it. And I don't believe it was him. I think it was something that was masquerading as him and using him as a vector in order to do this to people. So you can get hurt just by getting a psychic reading in this community. It just depends on who you talk to. And that's something that, how do you know? Well, you really don't. You really don't. You have to go by feedback, and you have to be very cautious.
Yeah, it takes talking and not gossiping, but really reflecting and testing on what your perceptions are before you make assumptions. Because a lot of times they do use people's images for things, and that should try to make you think something about someone and then gossip about them and create all this dissension. So that's true. I'm trying to. I saw a video with I don't think I sent it to you, but it was a 2018 video with Brett Stewart, who's the remote viewing guy of I don't know, Remote Viewing Technical Institute, and it was an interview he did with Carrie Cassidy. But I don't think he has this company anymore. But it was something very interesting that he remote viewed that I noticed simply because of my work with Dr. Corrado Malanga. But long story short, he remote viewed a underground pyramid structure in a tundra cold location, I think in Russia, but it could have been North America, where he noticed that this ancient pyramid was like a technology that had high frequency light and sound that came in several directions with, let's say, a human being sitting in a chair, and then it would affect their consciousness. So they became multidimensionally aware in a way that was really beyond our human identity, personality, consciousness. and that once this person maybe made a choice to do this, like a major initiation of some sort, then because their consciousness was so expanded, maybe it didn't fit into their human body avatar, and so they got new human bodies that were like cloned, modified bodies. So he talked about how he saw this in a remote viewing with others when they got their new modified body after they went through the change of this multidimensional consciousness. The body was a larger body. It was actually taller. And I don't know if it was Caucasian or if it mattered what race, but he described the body and the presence of this being. When that being was in front of you and trying to communicate, its presence was so vast, and its eyes would light up very, very bright white light, like shooting out, so that a normal human couldn't handle like the light and the consciousness. It could like burn your face, or it would be like, it made me remember, like, how Moses with the burning bush, or these Anunnaki beings, if they had the glowing eyes, you couldn't look at them directly. And so the interaction with these beings who had this consciousness, that's how their presence was. But the way he described it, and this is that I think a lot of people don't know, in Dr. Corrado Malanga's work, where he has a hierarchy of aliens based on his research with alien abductees and doing these regressions and finding out a type of hierarchy of the different kinds of beings that are responsible for mostly the abductions, where they're basically imposing their will on us and using our spirits as a battery or causing us to be recycled. And so the top head honcho, on top of the Horus Ra being, was the being he called the primordial man, also known as Adam Kadmon. But it was like kind of like a male figure in a robe, but with like the super bright shining eyes. And it was a type of being that was seen numerous times by people, where it was connected to the soul of the person, so that they would come back over and over again to be recycled by this being. But what's interesting is that Robert Stanley, years ago, I don't know if you've heard of Robert Stanley, like it was like 30 years ago, had an encounter with this primordial man being. And it was a very, very profound experience that probably had a spiritual impact on him.
Was he referring to him as Enki?
Yes, and he was. And then I don't know if he changed his mind, but see, Robert Stanley was on a show, I don't know whose it was, 6 months ago, and he had joined the Order of Melchizedek, which is, a high occult order that supposedly is helping mankind in some benevolent way. But in my view, when I saw that thing that Brett Stewart talked about, and then the being, what it reminded me of was like, wait a minute, I think there's a type of being that, let's say they had a deal where they could become like gods with this technology underneath this grand pyramid. But then in order to maintain this consciousness, they had to go into different kinds of like cloned created bodies. And then they would be able to interact in this multidimensional level, in and out of time and space, in and out of our reality. But they had to be in this form. But they would be basically acting like gods to many of the beings that they interact with on these different levels. But my sense is, I don't know why I picked up on this, I feel like it's a type of being that is what we call the Metatronic Cube 12D trap, that you can be a god in this 12D cube trap, but you can't get beyond it. So it's like, well, you can become a god in this realm, but you don't go beyond the 12D cube. And this is like the ones who are pretending to be gods, and they cause us to be recycled, but they're not like the real God of the all that is. So, but most people don't see this particular type of being in their experiences because it's actually rare. But when you do find it, then well, that's the primordial man. He's like a head honcho type of being. So I don't know if anybody else had seen that particular remote viewing type of interview, because a lot of people haven't heard. They don't know what's going on with this Brett Stewart guy. I don't even know if he has his remote viewing type of institute anymore, because what he saw was really incredible. I think that they wanted to put a lid on it and not talk about it, actually.
Was that called technical intuition?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. He took all of his videos down. He had some great work because it coincided with the Farsight Institute's remote viewing of what happens after you die and you're recycled. they actually remote viewed a council that was in control of the solar system. They were very negative, arrogant individuals. And they also showed that some people do get out of the matrix. These are probably, what you could call the angelics or the primes. They're rescued out of here, but everybody else just constantly gets recycled. And they also remote viewed a soul fracturing process where it looked like something was being removed from the person and they were being sent back, like it was going to the cloud. So they were stripping away the memories, is what they were seeing. Because on the astral, or the AI will present itself the way it wants you to understand it. So that's from my experience, but that's what they were seeing. So and the other thing too, the whole Anunnaki story is a stepping stone to get people off of the mainstream religion into this false awakening stuff. And that was the foundational beliefs, for the joy of Satan. It all has the same theme. You can be a god.
Yes.
And that taps into something that, people have been sent here to actually activate, to do something positive. It hijacks it and it gives them this, delusion that they can be a god and not who they really are.
Yeah.
And to do what they're supposed to. So it's an elaborate program that they've set up. And I would say, the joy of Satan was a real education for me, because everything that we've talked about, Eve, they've literally incorporated that into one thing. And you mentioned to me, it sounds experimental, and it absolutely is, because this is one of the first bigger cults that they've incorporated all of these strategies in. Yet it comes at the advent of social media, creating the virtual temple complex. So instead of building a pyramid or a temple and going through all of that work like they did in the ancient times, now they can build one in a matter of minutes, creating a forum, setting up somebody in the same exact way they did before, and then programming a larger group of people. So basically, their evil has gone viral, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, this reminds me of something that I heard many years ago. It was a MK Ultra Monarch programmed survivor named Beth Gooby, and she had, I think, done some interviews, but mostly written interview testimony. And this was like probably the year 2000-ish. I don't even know, but I remember her talking about how they were creating astral, how can I call it, like astral grids of energy, mostly made out of sexual energy and probably a human sacrifice energy as well. But one of the ways that she was utilized is that she had like sex altars that would have sex with quote, the John, who would be like also an operative in the cult, who had tantric magical abilities to use the sexual energy through interacting with the sex altar, and then use that energy and take it up into the astral realm and create these grids. So they basically created artificial realities in the astral realm that they then would take people to and interact with. So they could create entire grids and realities in the astral realm, like the temple complexes. But this was before, maybe they had something so sophisticated. But the other thing I wanted to comment on, because it was on Rob's show, Lauda Leon was on the show with another gentleman, but she talked about how in one of her experiences, I remember her talking about this before, where there were these I don't know if they were monks or yogis who had wanted her to help them transcend and get through the different realms to get to exit, basically to exit this reality. And that there seemed to be like everybody, all these ascended masters were like stopped at this particular area in multidimensional reality, where this was the escape hatch of the 12D cube or something, but they couldn't get out. And that she had tried to get out, but then she was slammed back in her body with some severe physical repercussions. But for some reason, she knew, and she used a term for this, and I forgot the term, but at a particular point in our time in this, I don't know what timeline it is. It could be many different timelines. There will be it's not an event horizon, but some people call it the wave or the event, when many things change in our cosmic galactic solar system reality, where that's when the gates open and then we will become free from this whole system. But what's interesting is I knew someone years ago who was one of these very gifted psychic starfire people, and that in one of her near-death experiences, and this was decades ago, she was very close to death, and she went into the black inky void, which is not the white light tunnel. She ended up in this very peaceful place that was way, far outside of our reality. And she was guided there by a sister who had passed on and was helping her, because she could have passed over, but her sister actually helped guide her to this place way out on the edges of multidimensional reality, and told her that, you don't want to die now. You want to wait, and you want to stay in your body. You want to stay alive until the wave. And the wave, when the wave comes, that's when we will be free from the recyclement, or the possibility that if you die, you can get recycled, which was why when Lauda saw all these like ascended masters hanging out and they didn't want to leave, they didn't want to take the chance of like getting recycled and then going through amnesia again. So I think there is something that is coming up that will free us from this system, and that, the time is close. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's what I've been getting from my higher self since I broke free. I was actually getting it a little bit prior to that, leading up to it. That's what I call the purge of the planet. And that has to do with the way I understand it. There's going to be a purge on the outside, but the purge on the inside takes place when those people like us, when their higher selves leave us to do this. Some people may be aware that it's happening and have memories of it, and some may not. Probably most won't. But that's what they're afraid of, and that's why they're hijacking people. That's why they're doing this to all of us, because there is a plan to break this system down and open these gates up. When I heard Lauda say that, because the thing was interesting when I first met her is I contacted her and she sensed what she needed to sense about me. So there wasn't any of this interference. And I was really pleased and surprised at the same time. But we talked about this, and she was open to these concepts. And it was one of the first times I went public talking about it, because I feel like people think I'm crazy when they hear this stuff. But yeah, there is an event coming and they're desperate to stop it. That's what the hijacking is. They know they known for a long time this is coming. And not to toot my own horn, but one of the things that I said because I was interrogated telepathically sitting right in this chair about a year ago, actually 366 days ago. I had a corporal from White Sands who was communicating with me through some kind of telepathic computer interface. I could see vaguely he was in a room at a desk with a computer, but it was more of a lab-like environment. And he said, if you answer some questions for me, I've got a few. Well, if I answer some for him, I could ask him one. I could ask him a few. One of the things that I asked him, to be a smart ass, I said, because I said, when the event happens and I come for you, are you going to be afraid of me? And he stuttered, and he stammered a little bit, and then he acted, like he was in control and they were in control. And he said, that's not going to happen. We've taken precautions for that. So, but that's what they were doing at the White Sands facility. They had clones of us, and they were using these clones to make us sick and to control us. So the ones that they really had problems with in their programs that were failed projects wound up under this Project Alpha, which is the super soldier program that people talk about. And they were putting people in this facility, and I could see it. They showed it to me. It was like a bunch of workstations, and there was military personnel there. Actually, I wasn't the only one who saw it. I have, two friends that remote viewed it as well. And they had workstations, and everybody had their clone. It was unconscious, and they were doing horrible things. In my case, they were puncturing, my genitalia with needles, and they're injecting something into my ankle. And, to this day, a year and a half later, I still have ankle pain on my left ankle and inflammation, because they're able to cause major damage to your body like that. And they were using these silver cord attachments. They had a life force cord that I had to break in order to shut that down, because then they could see, not only can they make you sick and injure you, but they can kill you. They can just shut your heart right off. And they were affecting me with everything that was wrong with me that they had induced to me over the years, the spinal injuries, the heart issues, the autonomic nervous system problems. I could see there was a cord corresponding to each of those areas. So they've literally got a program to stop people like us, to shut us down and to make us sick. And that's what they're doing. I mean, if you're getting these artificial dreamscapes, you're getting these attacks, they're doing it to everybody, but the really unruly ones, they've actually got a program that they've got set up, a horrifying, disgusting program that people work at the White Sands base, go home to the neighboring city that's on the other side of the mountain pass, and they live amongst everybody else, but this is what they do for a living. And they're programmed. And I asked him, I said, are you under the influence of AI? And he says, I've got AI in me. It makes sure it helps me do my job, is what he said.
Yeah, I think I remember there was I'm trying to remember who interviewed him. It might have been a James Rink interview with a man named World Traveler, the Metal Man, World Traveler or something. And he worked in an underground base for many years, but he was retired and he was about 70, but he did not look it at all. And he claimed that he was part hybrid human. But one of the things that he mentioned, working in an underground facility with aliens, and that many of the humans did work with them, and they all had some kind of probably an implant so that they could connect in with what he called the alien domain, which was like a channel frequency of alien hive mind consciousness, where they would get the telepathic communications of the aliens. So he called it the
Right.
alien domain. But I think that, quote, the normal humans might have had implants so that basically you don't even have your private thoughts anymore. You have to do what you're told, and there's complete control of your consciousness through this alien domain frequency channel. But he was able to communicate more easily because he claimed to be a hybrid. But this almost reminds me of something that I remember, James, that the guy named Dan Sherman, who was the Project Preserve Destiny MILAB project, where in the early days they trained him to do intuitive communication with alien greys in particular, but also with other humans. So that I think the whole reason was, oh, maybe in the future we would lose communication, so we have to train people to communicate telepathically. But when I think about it now, there's like a frequency channel they could lock you into that's basically the alien hive mind. And I think that we don't want that. We don't want to be locked into that frequency. When we want to get out of that hive mind telepathic frequency and communicate more pure with our spirit. And that's like the mental entrainment that takes place, I think, with people who work in these underground bases where they're taken over. They're part of a Luciferic brotherhood, or they're basically taken over, and they just do the bidding of whoever their handlers are. That's what I think.
Yeah, you're
But
absolutely right.
yeah,
Because I asked the guy, I said, are you okay?
I was coughing. I was going to say something else, but it was
I'll let you go ahead and say it, because a lot of times I forget when I do stuff like that and I lose my train
it
of
was
thought.
actually I know I do this too, and I don't want to interrupt, but it's actually a positive thing, because in the work of Dr. Corrado Malanga, which many people don't really know it in the UFO or the alien ET research community, because he's Italian, and he did a lot of research that basically showed the aliens having basically nefarious agendas with using our eternal spirit as a battery to embed themselves and their consciousness in us, to live their programs through us, to activate the realities and the consciousness and the agendas they want with our spirit, like batteries. But one of the things that they did apparently, and there's something on my website, I wrote an article about it, and it was an excerpt from 2 interviews, which are translations from Italian, where he would do these regressions with abductees and be able to talk to their eternal spirit. And so the eternal spirit would have the truth about what really happened in the abduction with the aliens. And so the whole interview was about how oftentimes in these experiences and abductions, there's like human military involved who are like doing the jobs of the aliens. And they're actually real people who were recruited like in the 40s or during the Nazi era, who didn't have families. And so they were recruited, and they were told that they would have maybe prolonged lifetimes or certain positive things that they would get out of working for this Nazi thing, but they're really working for the aliens. But they basically entrapped them to basically abduct people and be basically taking part in the abduction programs. So in these Malanga called it the mental simulations. It's really like a hypnotherapeutic process of connecting with the higher self to basically kick out the aliens, more or less. But there's ways that once you do this, that you can entrap them including the human military who are doing the bidding so that you entrap them in another dimension so they can no longer do what they're doing. So there's actually ways to operate within a hypnotherapy or a healing session once you're working with someone, and then you could actually entrap the aliens. You can kick them out, and then you can burn them with the power frequency of your higher self, basically burn them up.
You mean
and
with
then
the
you
white
can
light?
entrap
You're referring
the
to the
human
white light?
military. Well, it's actually the golden light. It's actually the golden light of your eternal spirit. But he talked about how these human military were totally tricked into being recruited and working for the Nazis and the aliens to help abduct people to be part of this. And then they're trapped in time and space doing this. So, but there's ways to entrap them so that they can no longer affect you. So there's ways to get out of it, basically.
That's interesting. James, did you want to comment on any of that?
I will just continue on a theme that Nathan brought up. There has been a lot of corralling and hijacking of certain demographics in society. I mean, a classic example is the whole Gaia TV narrative, super soldier, secret space program that hijacked a lot of people out there into the whole. I'm kind of frozen up. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I'm just caught in a grotesque grimace, but that's okay.
You're stuck in a timeline now.
I'm stuck in a timeline. What Evie was just talking about, get me out.
Yeah.
And so, and there was some programming involved where people would say, well, I looked into this, Gaia TV stuff, and I started, getting all these bad reactions, reactions. And to me, that's if taken at face value, if they're telling the truth, that they start plugging into this kind of Gaia TV secret space program narrative, and they start feeling very bad and start getting all these negative physical reactions, that is a pre-installed program for them to feel that way. And the psychological effect it has on them is, oh, I must have been part of this. If I'm getting this kind of bad reaction, it doesn't mean that they've been part of it. It means that perhaps they've been pre-programmed to have a reaction to exposure to that information, right? Point being is that there was a lot of people out there that just jumped on that whole Gaia TV narrative. And that was a way of corralling all these people that have these innate metaphysical powers. And that's what they're afraid of. See, there's already marginalization. We've seen the marginalization of actual alien contactees, alien abductees for decades now. We're even seeing it in this new so-called disclosure. On the one hand, they're making the emphasis on the technology. Oh, we've got this technology, which we've known they've had all along, right? But when one of the panelists for that congressional inquiry was asked, well, how do we get the public involved if they want to make reports about aliens and UFOs, what have you, UAPs, whatever they're called now. One of the panelists, the guy on the far left, he talked about the cube-shaped craft that were being seen by military pilots. He said something to the effect, no, we should only have professional military people and people within the defense establishment come forth with this information. That's an example of what I've been talking about for years, how they're going to create a new military priesthood. And they already made inroads to that with these frauds like Nick Pope, this fake Ministry of Defense British guy who's not a real UFO researcher. So they've made inroads into that for some time now, bringing these people out as these faux military defense industry, Defense Department type experts. Now they're going to have a whole bevy of them come out. And the end result is, just as the guy said, the panelists in the congressional hearing, no, we shouldn't take in reports from civilians. The implication is we're not qualified, we're stupid, we're prone to, seeing things that aren't really there when we're the ones having the experiences, right? So on the one hand, they're marginalizing, once again, all these alien encounter reports. And on the other hand, just as we saw with back in the days of John Carpenter, when he was the director of MUFON's alien abduction research, there are efforts on the part of these people out there to obtain personal information from actual alien abductees, once again. So on the one hand, they're marginalizing the alien encounter phenomena. And on the other hand, there are these very public efforts to obtain information from real alien abductees. Now, why is that? I would suggest that part of it is because we have these innate metaphysical powers, for lack of a better term. And Nathan talked about this too. There's some things we do in our higher self, which are uncontrollable. We go off at times on these standalone ops where we're doing things, we're investigating, we're doing recons in alternate realities, even not just in this reality or this cosmos, not just interdimensionally either. And that is a wild card that they don't like. They like it when they can access us, exploit our abilities, amp up our abilities when we're in their presence, and they utilize us for this, that, or the other purpose. They like that. And then they return us, and then we're worn out and tired and exhausted the next day. They have no problem with that, but they don't like this freelancing where we can just all of a sudden on our own start doing these recons, astral recons, physical recons, alternate reality. We can alter what's going on here by what we do in alternate realities. And these deep black programs do this all the time. We have this innate means to do that, some of us anyway. So what do? Well, they corral us. We've seen this with remote viewers who they join these, I'm not going to say which, but there are some remote viewing groups out there that once these natural remote viewers, clairvoyants, get into their clutches, they start having all kinds of problems. One of our friends, the late Colleen Johnston, a colleague of Evie and I, she went through this too. They tried to recruit her into a remote viewing program. She was a natural mystic, a natural seer. They tried to bring her in, and they caused all kinds of problems for her because she didn't want to go in, right? And so point being is that you have this big secret space Gaia TV narrative. It corrals, hooks in all these people who could otherwise pose a mortal threat to this whole wretched system, but now they're all caught up in all this drama, and they're all caught up in, patting themselves on the back for being great super soldiers. And I would call out everyone who thinks of them as a super soldier. If you really think you're a super soldier, stop working consciously for these controllers and start doing something. Turn this whole thing around. You have the innate ability to do this. If you can get out of your headspace, stop being arrogant, get into a heart space, because when we're on our headspace, that's the happy hunting ground of all these entities and all this AI remote control. We've got to get back into a heart-centered space, and there's nothing wrong with a heart-centered warrior. We've had those throughout history. So what I would encourage people to do is try to avoid getting corralled into these virtual setups, and they try to slot us in all these different categories. They have all these categories set up for MILABs, remote viewers, whatever the case may be. There's still a large, very vocal alien space brothers, warm and fuzzy aliens group out there. They're the ones that are still being interviewed in all these UFO alien documentaries. They're the go-to people all the time. They don't want to hear about these negative, malevolent entities that have been messing with our lifespans and recycling our souls and what have you. So we got to start operating at that level and recognize that there's all these different groups that are out there, if not to pull us in and exploit our abilities for their purposes, to at least neutralize us, so we no longer pose a short-term, intermediate, or long-term threat to them. Keep us in a state of high anxiety, targeted individual crap, keep us impoverished, keep us in dysfunctional interpersonal relationships, et cetera, et cetera. That's how the game works. So we got to rise above that. The clock's ticking. We got to turn this thing around.
Yeah, interesting.
That was extremely well said, James. Go ahead, Eve.
Yeah. Now I was trying to remember what you mentioned something. And it was something about Brett Stewart. Oh, I know what it was. On that same interview in 2018 with Brett Stewart and Carrie Cassidy, the same one where he talked about the pyramid complex underground. He talked about how he had attended it was like a Silicon Valley conference with, Silicon Valley really techie people who could spend money on these conferences for
like
their
the
work.
Sun Valley conference, you mean?
I don't know where it was, but it was a thing where they do like group meditations to enhance their productivity and their clarity, so they're more productive at work or whatever.
That way they can censor us better.
Yeah, but I guess what he saw when he was at this conference, because he's so psychic or whatever, that there was a woman who was working for some company out there in Silicon Valley who wanted to get the audience involved in doing a group meditation to, let's take part in this process that they developed to, make them clear and productive. But when they did the group meditation, he immediately felt something wrong and saw these weird tendril thingies coming over her head, from an entity, like a octopusy entity, and then one that would try to go on other people's heads who were in the audience who were doing it. And then I guess he interviewed some guy who was in the audience who decided their vibe and they felt something on their head. So in some of these, he was warning against group meditations where, they mean well to do these group meditations. And then you have some egregore entity with all these tendrils connected to some octopus beings, linking into your crown chakra. And then now they're working with groups of people to think they're real clear and psychic, but they're just under this egregore. So it was basically the warning, being very careful when we're engaging in group meditations and group intentions, to be mindful of the group involved and what egregore might be steering their consciousness to. It's a difficult thing because we know we're in a war, and we know there's forces that don't want us to use our abilities and to basically go on another timeline that's different from the one they want to be in, which is like hell world. So I think it's a matter of not getting ourselves pulled into the thought process and the belief systems of whatever groups that would actually pull us into the timeline. It corrals us into taking part in the drama and the thought processes of the timeline they want to pull you into through shared narratives. So this was actually something that Harold Kautzvella talked about in terms of, we're at a position of timelines are splitting, where some of us have this whole Mandela effect, or actually I've had future memories, two in particular, where they're actually very positive. It's a good future that's not too far off, actually. And I know that I'm there because I remember it and I feel it. So I know that whatever happens, if I stay focused on remembering and how it feels to be in this future timeline that I'm already on, that it will pull me into that timeline. And he seemed to think that because of this, the 60-70% that's already easily managed, right, with what's happened recently since 2020 and this technology, that they're going to use these large numbers to corral into the hell world timeline, which we don't want. So in order for us to go on the timeline that we do want, we can't allow our consciousness to be pulled into these arguments, to be pulled into a lot of political arguments and, fighting in the drama. It's like the drama triangle of, let's say, the narcissist, the victim, and the rescuer, or the continual drama triangle that when we get involved with others or groups of people, to let's wake the people up to tell them about the vaccine and about the, this political this or this, that, which is old news yesterday, that, you know what I mean? You already know, we want to move forward. So don't worry about fighting to wake people up. Basically, you move forward with what you know to be true in your heart, and you work with your heart and your spirit to guide you to pull you into that timeline and let others go the way that they're going. And so it's kind of like learning how to let go of major opinions and major groups and major group meditations and that kind of thing, which kind of puts you in an unpopular position of somewhat aloof. And it doesn't mean you don't agree with wanting to help others. It's just when we get pulled into other people's arguments and how they think what reality is, it can pull us into another timeline. And right
all
now,
the wailing and
Yeah.
gnashing about Donald Trump getting another indictment. It's like woohoo! It's like,
Yeah.
and he's the one that conned everyone going to the Capitol on January 6th. They forget about that, right?
Yeah.
And he could have just easily said, go out to your local plaza, your local city hall area and protest. Let them know all across the country in force that we're here, right? No, come to the Capitol where you're going to get corralled and, turned into detention inmates indefinitely is what happened. So definitely, I believe in what you're saying, Evie, that, I'd rather run with one than be dragged down by 20. At this point, we have to do what it takes to turn this thing around. And if we dissipate so many of our mental, physical, and other resources trying to drag people, General Patton likened it to trying to push a big plate of spaghetti, right? Instead of like just getting one strand and pulling it along, being the leader, just by saying, look, you're either coming along or you can do your own thing. It doesn't matter to me one way or the other, I'm going, right? These people are out there trying to push huge mounds of spaghetti and trying to get them to do what they want. And at this point, it's way too late for that. So I'm really glad that all of you are part of this effort to turn this whole thing around. And I do believe that there will be a good outcome. I don't have a Pollyanna attitude about it, that everyone's going to be freed, everyone's going to break out. No, that's certainly not the case. We observed in the recent past. But there will be some people that will be able to break free and dismantle it. So it's not enough, I think, to break out of this matrix. It has to be broken out of and dismantled, so it doesn't cause any problems for anyone ever again. So that's, what I would like as an outcome.
I agree. We've been going on. We only been going an hour and a half, but I have to do another show. We need to do a part 2, obviously, definitely. Can you guys tell everybody where to find? Thank you guys all for doing this. And can you guys tell everybody where to find you? And thank you so much. Whoever wants to go first. And
Well, I'll go first, and I can't believe it's been an hour and a half. I think we need to go another hour and a half. I'll do it part 2. Yeah, you can find me at the Planetary Consciousness Project on Telegram, and please sign up and join. You can interact with me and everybody else. And then the Hajan Contact E channel here on YouTube. I've got a Rumble channel, which is Voices of Orion Project. It's a little bit hard to find. They like to shadow ban me by name, so you got to leave the spaces out. And that's pretty much how you can find me right now. I'm kind of scarce besides that. But once you connect with me, I usually try to stay in touch if I have time.
And definitely stay in comms, Nathan, you and I, and
I'm
James
sorry.
Bartley.
I'm sorry,
let's
what
stay in
James?
comms. Yeah, let's stay in comms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. And, my website is thecosmicswitchboard.com. You can find me there, and you can send me messages through the website. And I'd love to hear from anyone who's had the kinds of experiences we've been talking about.
Yeah. Thank you, James. I'll just go ahead and go. Mine, I have a Telegram channel that's Alien Love Bite Telegram channel, and then evelorgen.com website, and then there's an Alien Love Bite Facebook group. So that's the best way to contact me.
all right, and I'll have all the links. I'll put all the links in the description. And thank you everybody for tuning in. And I'll send you guys a link when I post this. And thank you guys, and have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Easy, everybody.